Welcome to BBC News, broadcasting to viewers in North America on PBS and around the globe. I'm Nkem Ifejika. Our top stories. Prosecutors in the US charge 13 Russian nationals with interfering in the 2016 presidential election. Donald Trump visits a hospital in Florida where victims of Wednesday's high school shooting are being treated. Battling criminal gangs in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil's president orders the army to take over security in the state. And South Africa's new president sets out his plans to end corruption in his first State of the Nation address. Senior officials have charged 13 Russians with interfering in the presidential election that brought Donald Trump to power. They are the first charges from the U.S. Department of Justice as part of a long-running investigation into alleged meddling in the 2016 poll. President Trump has, again, insisted his campaign did nothing wrong. Our North America editor, John Sopel, reports.
There's probably not a person anywhere in the world who doesn't know who won the 2016 presidential election. But how it was won and who influenced the result is still the subject of rancorous dispute. Today, in a dramatic development, charges were brought against a number of Russians for their efforts to affect the outcome.
The defendants allegedly conducted what they called information warfare against the United States, with the stated goal of spreading distrust towards the candidates and the political system in general. They used stolen or fictitious American identities, fraudulent bank accounts, and false identification documents.
The indictment says they had a strategic goal to sow discord in the US political system, including the 2016 US presidential election. It says operations included supporting the presidential campaign of then-candidate Donald J. Trump and disparaging Hillary Clinton. From that famous night of his election victory onwards, Donald Trump has always sought to play down Russia's role.
Could very well have been Russia, but I think it could well have been other countries.
Both on the effect they had and on whether his campaign colluded. On those 2 points, the Deputy Attorney General had helpful words today.
Now, there is no allegation in this indictment that any American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity. There is no allegation in the indictment that the charged conduct altered the outcome of the 2016 election.
And Donald Trump didn't wait long to tweet his reaction. Russia started their anti-US campaign in 2014, long before I announced that I would run for president. The results of the election were not impacted. The Trump campaign did nothing wrong, no collusion. The Russia campaign was allegedly under the direction of Yevgeny Prigozhin, a close ally of Vladimir Putin. Tonight he was scornful, dismissing the Americans as being very emotional. If they want to see the devil, he said, let them. Donald Trump left Washington this evening to fly to his home in Florida. He'll be buoyed by the indictment saying nothing about collusion, but the Russia investigation goes on, and that is a source of fury to the president. John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
Well, David Tafuri is an international lawyer and a former U.S. State Department official. He's on our Washington bureau. David, if you're listening to that tape that we just played, they were talking about disparaging Hillary Clinton, and which could have been anyone who ran in that presidential election. But from a legal perspective, just how serious are the charges in this indictment?
Well, the indictment is stunning in the level of detail and the presentation of evidence of Russia interfering in our 2016 election. Now, as the previous report mentioned, there's no reference to Americans participating or supporting that interference. However, as Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein said, that he referred to just this indictment. Now, we don't know what's coming in the next indictment or whether there'll be more indictments in the future, but a careful prosecutor like Mueller would go about this on a step-by-step process, and this could be just the next step in a long investigation that's going to result in more indictments. It's also notable that this activity and interference, while very serious and having potentially very serious consequences on the 2016 election, it doesn't doesn't include everything that we know happened in the 2016 election. For instance, if you go back to the intelligence assessment report last January, it talks about the hacking of the DNC emails, and that also was illegal interference by Russia. This indictment doesn't go to that at all. So perhaps the next indictment will go to that and who is responsible for that illegal activity. And then the question there will be, was the Trump campaign or were any other Americans involved in that?
It appears as if, David, that there will be so many layers and so many elements to Robert Mueller's investigation, and I suppose that it could upset some people who think he's exceeding his remit.
Well, this doesn't exceed his remit at all. In fact, this is fully within his remit. Remember, his remit was to investigate Russian interference in our 2016 election. And if you look at this indictment, it goes right to the heart of that. In fact, identifying specific individuals and entities, Russians, who were responsible for this interference. So perhaps in the future, you could make that argument about some of the things he might do in the future. But this one, no. This is right on.
But here's the crucial question, is whether the Russian interference had any bearing whatsoever on the result of the election.
Well, from a legal perspective, that doesn't make a difference. So if Russians broke the law, if Americans helped them break the law, those are very serious violations, go to the heart and the sanctity of our democracy that Mueller is clearly going to move forward on prosecuting and trying to punish those who are responsible. Whether or not those things made a difference in the election, that's in the past. And no one's ever going to be able to tell whether this Russian interference, which clearly happened, and the indictment shows even more evidence that it did happen, we won't know whether it actually made a difference. That's not provable.
Okay, thank you very much. That's David Tafuri, who is a lawyer and also former State Department official. Now, the FBI has admitted that it failed to act on warnings about the teenager who was charged with the mass shooting in Florida on Wednesday. Nicholas Cruz is accused of killing 17 people at a high school in the Miami suburb of Parkland. Meanwhile, more funerals have been held for the victims of the deadly attack. Our North America correspondent Ali Maqbool sent this report.
They're coming to mourn a girl who was shot dead inside her school, one of the 17 victims of America's latest mass shooting. Alyssa Al-Hadef had been passionate about playing football and had been a popular and talented pupil. Earlier, thousands had gathered to remember all of those who died. In many cases, friends that only a few days ago they'd shared classrooms with. They included 14-year-old Jamie Gutenberg, who family members say stood up for those who were bullied. Her father spoke at the vigil.
I sent her to school yesterday. She was supposed to be safe.
Among the others who died, Meadow Pollock, who was heading to university next year. Joaquin Oliver, a basketball player who loved writing poetry. And 14-year-old Cara Logren, who her family says was a great student who loved being at the beach. All lives that were cut short by Nicholas Cruz, who the FBI admitted today it had received a call about to its hotline number at the beginning of January. The caller provided information about Cruz's gun ownership, desire to kill people, erratic behavior and disturbing social media posts, the statement says, as well as the potential of him conducting a school shooting. We've determined that protocols were not followed and no further investigation was conducted at the time. And that huge mistake has now allowed gun advocates to divert attention from the other big concern, how easily the attacker was able to arm himself. Well, this is where Nicholas Cruz bought his weapon. All he had to do was produce his driving license, give the most basic of personal details, and then answer a question to say that he wasn't mentally ill. He was 18 at the time, too young to buy alcohol here, but old enough to walk out of this shop with an AR-15 rifle. Young survivors here are insisting on better gun control, where they feel many adults are letting them down.
The fact that I have to say this is absolutely horrifying, but I feel the need to because this is the blood of children that is on the floor of a school now. These are 17 children that are dead.
The politicians, again, are promising change. You call this a talking point, but why would this be any different to all the atrocities that have gone before? What makes you feel this will be different?
I've never seen students speak out as boldly as they have. Maybe this is the turning point.
Close to the school, students demonstrated to demand a solution to stop this type of tragedy happening again. In truth, America remains a long way off finding a way to end its problems with guns.
Well, President Trump has arrived in Florida in the last couple of hours. During visits to a hospital and the sheriff's office in Parkland, he praised emergency workers and medical staff for their response.
They have done an incredible job. The doctor was amazing. We saw numerous people and incredible recovery. Incredible. And first responders, everybody. The job they've done is incredible, and I want to congratulate you. Incredible job.
Did you speak with victims, Mr. President?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did indeed, and it's very sad something like that could happen. But the job the doctors did, the nurses, the hospital, first responders, law enforcement, really incredible. The speed that they got the victims over to the hospital was like record. One case 20 minutes and one case 19 minutes from the time of the shot. It's an incredible thing. Thank you very much.
Do our gun laws need to be changed, Mr. President?
Well, a short time ago, we spoke to our correspondent Barbara Plett-Usher from outside Broward Hospital.
Yes, very brief mentions there on a very brief visit. I don't think he was here for more than 15 or 20 minutes. He says he met with victims. He also met with medical staff, congratulated them on an excellent job. And as you said, didn't really respond to that question about gun laws. He hasn't spoken about the issue of tightening gun control laws at all so far in his speeches. He has talked about ensuring the safety of schools, making them safer. He's also deflected the issue to a mental health one. He said this is evidence of a mental health crisis and people should be more vigilant about reporting signs of disturbed behavior. But the people here are asking, amongst other things, for tighter gun controls. How could this young man find it so easy to purchase an assault weapon that could cause so much damage when there had been some signs of troubled behavior in his past? They are also asking for practical steps at schools. They're asking for things like metal detectors and more security, and I suspect when President Trump takes this up, if he does further, that will be more what he'll focus on than that very complex and fraught issue of changing gun control laws.
And that was Barbara Plett-Usher in Florida. Now let's take a look at some of the other stories making the news. A state of emergency has been declared in Ethiopia a day after the resignation of Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn. The governing party says emergency rule is vital to safeguarding the constitutional order. Ethiopia only fully lifted its last state of emergency in August. Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel says she's not frustrated by the Brexit process, but is curious to know more about the UK's aims after meeting Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May in Berlin earlier on Friday. Mrs. May reiterated her desire to maintain the closest possible economic ties with Germany and the EU, but said there would have to be a new balance of rights and obligations. Now, the Brazilian government has given the military full control to oversee security in Rio de Janeiro in response to growing gang violence. Rio's governor issued an appeal for help after the annual carnival celebrations were marred by violence. Stefan Levy reports.
From this to this. Just a week on from the beginning of this year's Rio Carnival. Despite thousands of police on the streets during the annual celebrations, a series of armed robberies and confrontations between rival gangs shone a spotlight on the city's deteriorating security situation. Tourist areas, usually considered safe, transformed into a hotbed of crime and violence. On Friday, Brazilian President Michel Temer signed a decree giving the military full control of security operations in Rio.
O crime organizado quase tomou conta do estado do Rio de Janeiro.
Organised crime has virtually taken control of the state of Rio de Janeiro. It's a metastasis that has extended throughout the country and threatens the tranquility of our nation. For that reason, we have just called for a federal intervention in the public security for Rio de Janeiro.
The army already patrols some of the most dangerous areas of the city where drug gangs operate, but now their presence will be felt all over Rio, a situation unheard of since Brazil's return to democracy in 1985, after 21 years of military rule. Rio's police budget has been slashed in recent years because of an economic crisis. Finances in the state have been badly hit by a national recession and a slump in oil prices, as well as high levels of alleged corruption. Mr. Temer's decree is expected to be approved by Brazil's National Congress next week, and with it, hope amongst local people that something is being done. Stefan Levy, BBC News.
And just about a couple of hours ago, just as I was coming into the office, the powerful earthquake hit the southwest of Mexico. The 7.2 magnitude quake was felt across the southern states of Guerrero, Puebla and Oaxaca. It caused buildings to shake in the capital, Mexico City, more than 300 kilometers away. Many people said they feared a repeat of the devastating earthquake in September, which killed nearly 400 people, but there have been no reports of casualties so far. Stay with us on BBC News. Still to come, we look at pedal power in the skies, the little airship trying to cross the Mediterranean. This is BBC News. The latest headlines. 13 Russian nationals have been charged by the US Special Counsel, Robert Mueller, with interfering in the 2016 presidential election. Donald Trump has met survivors of Wednesday's high school gun attack in Florida, in which 17 people were killed. Now, the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has warned that the country faces tough decisions after inheriting a stagnating economy and a large national debt. In his first State of the Nation address, he pledged to fight corruption. Our Africa editor Fergal Keane reports.
To those who remember the birth of this democracy nearly quarter of a century ago, the day had echoes of past greatness. He helped forge the historic compromise that delivered this nation. Now he has risen to lead it. Across this most diverse of nations, they'd waited through years of corruption, but with the patience which has always forestalled catastrophe here. And tonight he tried to do that in a speech that blended lofty rhetoric with a blunt warning.
We are determined to build a society defined by decency and integrity that does not tolerate the plunder of public resources nor the theft by corporate criminals of the hard-earned savings of ordinary people.
Specifics there weren't many. Next week's budget and the composition of his new cabinet, due in days, will tell a lot. He finished with an appeal to basic patriotism.
This is now the time where we should honor the memory of Nelson Mandela to build a new, better South Africa for all our people. Now is the time. Thank you very much.
Even the ANC's strongest opposition critics joined the standing ovation, something that would have been unthinkable in the Jacob Zuma years.
I've just come out of the Parliament chamber and the goodwill there was quite extraordinary, even from the opposition. And that exists across this country. Above all, an overwhelming desire for change. Cyril Ramaphosa now has a short time to capitalise on that.
With such support, President Ramaphosa is now in an unprecedented position to take on those who captured the state through corruption. After the joy will come the battle. Expect him to be ruthless. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Cape Town.
Black Panther, America's first black superhero, has finally arrived in cinemas. It's the 18th film in the Marvel universe, and if early ticket sales are any indication, it could be the most successful yet. Jin O'Brien has been tracing its history from comic book to silver screen.
He may be the king of the world's most advanced nation and possess superhuman strength and senses, but it's still taken Black Panther more than half a century to leap from the page to the big screen. And in the process, many artists have put their creative stamp on his character.
A lot of times I'll design that in the thumbnail stage, and then I will pose myself so I can get...
So you're the Black Panther?
I'm the Black Panther. I'm actually every character that I draw.
Sean Martinborough illustrated Black Panther, The Man Without Fear in 2010.
The Black Panther does a backflip kick, knocks this guy out, then the ninjas are on the floor, defeated, and they start to disintegrate because that's what the ninjas do.
He's worked on a range of comic book characters, including Batman and another black superhero, Luke Cage. But Black Panther could be a game changer. Directed by Ryan Coogler, the movie cost $200 million to make and is expected to top $150 million this week, setting a record for a film directed by an African American. Its big budget, global release and marketing push by Disney are challenging assumptions about films with predominantly black actors and producers.
I think this movie is going to do gangbusters when it hits the theaters. The fact that it's out, I think, pacing Star Wars in terms of advanced ticket sales, that says that there's an audience for this. And you'd be really stupid to let any personal biases you have preclude you from making money.
The film's setting is also significant. Wakanda, a fictional African nation that outstrips any so-called developed country in the West.
I have seen gods fly.
If you're a young person keeping up with politics and you're hearing politicians say that, you know, a country where your family descends from is a crap hole country, seeing someone like the Black Panther on the screen, that's going to mean a lot to you because it's something that you haven't seen before, but now it's something that you know you can strive to be.
Woo! Let's go!
Let's have some fun.
Black Panther already makes a powerful statement on many levels, but the superhero's greatest feat may be to actually change the face of a Hollywood often criticized for being too white.
That report's from Jane O'Brien. Switzerland's Roger Federer has become the oldest player to top the world tennis rankings. 5 years after losing his spot at the top, Roger Federer has reclaimed the position at the age of 36. His elevation in the rankings came after he beat the Dutch player Robin Haase in straight sets to reach the semi-finals of a tournament in Rotterdam. Federer, who's a 20-time Grand Slam champion, said being number one at his age is a dream come true. Now let's head to the south of France now, and a daring adventure to cross the Mediterranean. A Frenchman is planning to travel from Nice to Corsica. All he will use is a small inflatable zeppelin and a whole lot of pedal power. The BBC's Tim Allman explains.
Come take a trip in my airship. Come sail away to the stars.
It doesn't fly very high, it doesn't fly very fast, but don't underestimate this little airship. Its creator and pilot, Stéphane Rousson, has big plans for what he calls his Zeppi. This is a precise piece of engineering, a bicycle-like structure, 2 propellers and a 20-meter-long helium-filled balloon. It is both daring and delicate.
La difficulté, c'est que c'est une machine qui est extrêmement sensible au...
The difficulty is that the machine is extremely sensitive to weather conditions because you need wind speeds of less than 5 kilometers an hour in order to fly. That means the sea must be completely flat, not a single wave on the water.
The plan is to cross the Mediterranean, metaphorically setting sail from Nice, heading towards Calvi on the northern coast of Corsica, a journey of 175 kilometers. This was simply a test flight, one that caused a little bemusement for passing traffic. Stéphane tried crossing the English Channel 10 years ago, but had to give up after 80 hours of pedalling and a distance of 35 kilometers. The attempted flight to Corsica, if flight is the right word, is expected to take place later this year. Tim Allman, BBC News.
As a fair weather cyclist, his thighs are going to be burning, I can assure him of that. A reminder of our top story this hour. Senior US officials have charged 13 Russians with interfering in the presidential election that brought Donald Trump to power. Mr. Trump has once again denied collusion between his campaign and the Russians. This is Nkemi Fejika for BBC World News.